a soldier's sacrifice, a loyal dog's grief, and an unexpected bond forged through loss. Follow Orion, Nathaniel's K9 partner, as he navigates love and loyalty beyond death, uniting two women in a heart-wrenching yet hopeful journey. Discover their story of healing and connection. Watch now.
The chapel was enveloped in a profound silence, one that felt almost suffocating. The air was thick with sorrow, each breath heavy with unspoken grief. Only the soft rustling of black clothing and the quiet sobs from the gathered mourners pierced through the stillness. The scent of white lilies intertwined with the palpable weight of loss, creating an atmosphere that seemed to cling to every soul present. They had all come to pay their respects to a hero, a man who had fought valiantly for his country and had given everything in the line of duty. At the heart of the chapel, beneath the stunning stained glass windows that captured the soft morning light in a kaleidoscope of colors, lay a dark oak casket polished to perfection. A neatly folded flag rested atop it, a poignant symbol of sacrifice, honor, and duty. But for those who knew Nathaniel Foster, this farewell felt unbearably cruel. He had braved countless explosions and ambushes, endured freezing nights in barren deserts, only to find his life extinguished in an instant. The reality of his lifeless form laying before them felt surreal, a stark contrast to the vibrant spirit he had once embodied. Arrayed in solemn formation, his fellow soldiers stood like sentinels, their faces rigid and expressions stoic. Each held the line against their emotions, but their eyes betrayed the profound pain they all shared. In the front pew, a woman with tightly pinned auburn hair clutched a damp tissue between trembling fingers. Clara, Nathaniel's sister, was the very picture of grief, her face drawn and pale, eyes swollen from the tears she could no longer shed. But the depth of this loss was most acutely felt by Orion, Nathaniel's loyal German Shepherd K9 partner. Orion stood at the entrance of the chapel, his leash held firmly by the officer who had brought him. His chest rose and fell rapidly, an instinctual response to the overwhelming emotions swirling around him. He sniffed the air, his deep brown eyes scanning the room, searching for a sign, an answer to the confusion that gripped him. When his gaze finally settled on the casket, something shifted within him. Orion froze, ears perked, gaze unwaveringly fixed on Nathaniel's still figure. Then, in a moment that took everyone by surprise, he broke free from the officer's grasp. The sound of his nails clicking against the polished floor echoed through the chapel as he sprinted down the aisle, driven by an urgency that seemed to transcend understanding. Before anyone could react, Orion leaped into the casket, landing with a soft thud that made the flag shift slightly. For a fleeting moment, it appeared as if Nathaniel might awaken, as if the bond between man and dog was strong enough to bridge the chasm of death. Orion curled up against his soldier's chest, sniffing frantically as if desperate for a response, a sign that his partner was still there. A low, mournful whimper escaped his throat, heavy with desperation and sorrow. Then, resting his head on Nathaniel's shoulder, he closed his eyes, surrendering to the grief that enveloped him. In that instant, time seemed to freeze, and the chapel fell into a breathless silence, as if the collective heart of everyone present had stopped beating. This was merely the beginning of a poignant journey that would unfold in the days to come. Clara Foster had always been the practical one in the family. As a hospital administrator, she dealt with life and death daily, navigating the complex emotions that accompanied both with a steady hand and clear mind. But nothing in her professional experience had prepared her for this moment. Watching Orion curl against her brother's still form shattered the careful composure she had maintained since receiving the news of Nathaniel's death 3 days ago. Her mind drifted back to that moment, standing in her kitchen, stirring sugar into her morning coffee, when the doorbell rang. The sight of 2 uniformed officers on her doorstep had caused the mug to slip from her fingers, shattering against the tile floor. She knew before they spoke. The coffee had spread across the floor like spilled blood, and she remembered thinking how strange it was that she noticed such a detail while her world collapsed around her. "Ma'am, we regret to inform you." The words had blurred together, becoming a distant hum as she gripped the door frame for support. They had spoken of honor, of sacrifice, of a mission gone wrong. But all Clara could think about was how Nathaniel had promised to come home for Christmas, how he had joked about finally teaching her to fish properly, how he had sworn this would be his last deployment. Now, standing in the chapel, those memories crashed over her like waves against a crumbling shore. The Nathaniel she knew, vibrant, laughing, full of life, was so at odds with the still figure in the casket that her mind struggled to reconcile the two. Sergeant Dwayne Carter watched Orion with a heaviness in his chest that threatened to suffocate him. He had been there when Nathaniel and Orion first met, a skeptical soldier and an eager young dog, neither knowing how deeply their lives would become intertwined. He remembered Nathaniel's initial resistance. "I don't need a four-legged babysitter," Nathaniel had grumbled, eyeing the German Shepherd with suspicion. "I can take care of myself." Carter had laughed then. "That dog isn't there to protect you, Foster. He's there to make you better." And he had. Over the months that followed, Nathaniel and Orion had become inseparable. Where one went, the other followed. They moved as a single unit, communicating without words, anticipating each other's needs before they arose. Carter had never seen a handler and canine bond so completely, so effortlessly. Their first mission together had been a tense house-clearing operation in a small village. Intelligence had indicated a high-value target might be hiding inside, but the narrow doorways and tight corners made it a dangerous proposition for the soldiers. Nathaniel had knelt beside Orion, whispering something in the dog's ear that Carter couldn't hear. Then with a hand signal, he had sent Orion forward. The dog had moved with precision, checking each room with a methodical thoroughness that impressed even the most experienced soldiers. When he alerted to a hidden cellar door beneath a rug, the team had found not only their target, but also a cache of weapons that would have caused devastating casualties had they remained undiscovered. That night back at base, Carter had found Nathaniel sitting outside his tent, Orion's head resting in his lap. The soldier had looked up, a newfound respect in his eyes. "You were right," Nathaniel had admitted, scratching behind Orion's ears. "He makes me better." Now, watching Orion cling to Nathaniel's lifeless body, Carter felt a pain so acute it was physical. He had lost men before, too many to count, but there was something about this loss that cut deeper. Perhaps it was the way Orion refused to accept what everyone else knew to be true. Or perhaps it was the memory of Nathaniel's last words to him before that final mission. "Take care of him if I don't come back," Nathaniel had said, nodding toward Orion, who was being checked over by the veterinary technician. "He deserves the best." Carter had scoffed, punching Nathaniel lightly on the shoulder. "Save the dramatic goodbye for someone who believes it. You'll be fine." But he hadn't been fine. And now Carter stood in a chapel thousands of miles from the dusty battlefield where Nathaniel had drawn his last breath, wondering how he was supposed to keep a promise that seemed impossible to fulfill. Chaplain Reynolds observed the scene with a heavy heart. In his 15 years serving as a military chaplain, he had presided over more funerals than he cared to count. Each one left a mark on his soul, a small scar that never fully healed. But there was something about this particular service that felt different, something that stirred in him a sense of the divine that transcended the ritualistic aspects of his role. He had not known Sergeant Nathaniel Foster personally. Their paths had crossed only briefly during a Sunday service at the base chapel several months ago. Foster had slipped in late, taking a seat in the back row, and had left before the final hymn. But Reynolds remembered him because of the intensity with which he had listened to the sermon on faith in the midst of darkness. After the service, Foster had approached him with a question that many soldiers asked in one form or another. "How do you believe in a good God when you see so much suffering?" Reynolds had given him the answer he always gave, that faith wasn't about understanding God's plan, but trusting that there was one. Foster had nodded, thanked him, and walked away. Reynolds had wondered then if his words had provided any comfort, any clarity. Now, watching Orion's unwavering devotion, he found himself questioning his own understanding of love, of loyalty, of the invisible bonds that tied souls together. The chapel was steeped in a silence so profound that it pressed against the chest, making it difficult to breathe. Orion lay on Nathaniel's lifeless body, his head resting against his soldier's shoulder, as though willing him to wake. His body trembled slightly, ears twitching at the faint echoes of sorrow that filled the room. Trained for combat, danger, and unwavering loyalty, nothing had prepared him for this moment of loss. His handler, his protector, his entire world was gone, and the reason why eluded him. A muffled cry broke through the air. Clara, Nathaniel's sister, gripped the edge of the pew, her knuckles white, as if it were the only thing anchoring her to reality. Her face was pale, and her eyes were swollen from weeping. Around her, the rows of soldiers sat frozen, their uniforms crisp and immaculate, their hands clasped tightly together. They had fought alongside Nathaniel, seen him return from the depths of hell, but nothing had prepared them for the sight of Orion curled against his chest, refusing to let go. One of the officers stepped forward cautiously, extending a hand toward Orion's collar, but the dog let out a low, warning growl. It wasn't aggressive, but protective, desperate. His grip on Nathaniel's uniform tightened, nails pressing into the fabric as if anchoring himself to the man who had been his whole life. The officer hesitated, then slowly withdrew his hand. No one in the room had the heart to force Orion away. "Let him be," Chaplain Reynolds said softly, his voice calm yet heavy with the weight of finality. "He's grieving, just like the rest of us." Clara wiped at her tears with shaky fingers, her voice barely a whisper. "He doesn't understand. He thinks Nathaniel is coming back." The words hung in the air, suffocating in their truth. Orion let out a small whimper, nudging Nathaniel's arm with his nose, just as he had done countless times on the battlefield when his handler had fallen. It was a signal. "Get up, soldier!" But there was no response. The memory of how Nathaniel and Orion had come into her life flooded Clara's mind. It had been 3 years ago, during one of Nathaniel's rare visits home. He had arrived at her doorstep unannounced, a duffel bag slung over one shoulder and a serious-looking German shepherd at his side. "This is Orion," he had said, a hint of pride in his voice as he scratched behind the dog's ears. "Military says he needs to stay with me even when I'm on leave. Hope you don't mind a house guest." Clara had been wary at first. Her apartment was small, and she had never been much of a dog person. But Orion had won her over within days. He was meticulously clean, unfailingly polite, and seemed to understand the concept of personal space better than most humans she knew. More importantly, she had seen how he transformed her brother. Nathaniel had always been reserved, keeping his thoughts and feelings locked tightly inside. But with Orion, he was different. More open, more relaxed, more willing to laugh. One evening, sitting on her balcony as the sun set, Nathaniel had confessed something that stuck with her. "You know what's weird? I've never felt closer to anyone than I do to this dog." He had glanced down at Orion, who lay at his feet, ever vigilant. "He doesn't care about my past, doesn't judge my choices. He just accepts me." Clara had smiled, understanding for the first time the depth of the bond between them. "That's not weird," she had replied. "That's love in its purest form." Now, watching Orion refuse to leave Nathaniel's side even in death, those words came back to her with painful clarity. This was love in its purest form, unburdened by human complexity, untainted by doubt or reservation. It was absolute, unwavering, and heartbreakingly beautiful. Suddenly, Orion's body stiffened, his ears pricked up, breathing shallow as he lifted his head slightly. His dark eyes locked onto something in the distance, something no one else could perceive. A chill swept through the room, barely perceptible, but enough to send shivers down Clara's spine. Orion wasn't just looking, he was tracking. Clara swallowed hard, glancing at the chaplain, then back at Orion. "What is it, boy?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. But Orion remained still, fixated on whatever it was that eluded the others. The atmosphere in the chapel shifted. Grief still hung thick in the air, but something else crept in, something unnamed and unsettling. The other soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't normal. Orion was highly trained. He wouldn't react like this unless there was something present. Sergeant Dwayne Carter, who had served with Nathaniel overseas, cleared his throat. "What's he looking at?" His voice trembled, caught somewhere between fear and reverence. No one answered. The silence stretched, thick and oppressive. Orion didn't blink, his breathing steady but focused, as if he were tracking a presence only he could perceive. Major Lillian Reeves, who had remained silent at the back of the chapel, felt a chill run down her spine. As Nathaniel's commanding officer, she had maintained her composure throughout the service, a pillar of strength for her unit. But Orion's behavior unsettled her in a way she couldn't explain. She had seen Orion work countless times, had witnessed his impeccable training, his unwavering focus. The dog didn't react without cause. If he was tracking something, there was a reason, even if it was beyond human understanding. Reeves' mind flashed back to her last conversation with Nathaniel. They had been reviewing the mission parameters, going over the potential risks one final time. Nathaniel had seemed distracted, his usual sharp attention wavering. "Something on your mind, Sergeant?" she had asked, closing the mission file. Nathaniel had hesitated, then shrugged. "Just a feeling, ma'am." What kind of feeling?" "Like this one's different." He had glanced at Orion, who sat alert at his side. "Can't explain it. Just different." Reeves had dismissed it as pre-mission jitters, something every soldier experienced regardless of their experience level. But now, watching Orion's strange behavior, she wondered if there had been more to Nathaniel's unease than she had recognized. Then, without warning, Orion let out a soft, breathy whimper that was different from the mournful cry before. This was subtle, questioning. His tail wagged just barely, and he lifted his head slightly higher, ears twitching as if listening for something faint and distant. Then, in a sudden shift, he relaxed. Not entirely, but enough for those closest to him to notice. Clara's throat tightened. "Orion," she whispered, taking a hesitant step forward. But the dog didn't respond. It was as if he were somewhere else entirely, a place free from grief, beyond this room, beyond the funeral, beyond death itself. Private First Class Miguel Alvarez, the youngest member of Nathaniel's unit, crossed himself instinctively. Raised in a deeply religious household, he had grown up with stories of spirits, of souls lingering after death, of the thin veil between worlds. Watching Orion's strange behavior, he couldn't help but wonder if the dog was seeing something, or someone, that the rest of them couldn't. Alvarez had been on his first deployment when he met Nathaniel. Fresh out of training, terrified but trying not to show it, he had been assigned to Nathaniel's squad. The older soldier had taken him under his wing, showing him the ropes, teaching him how to survive not just the enemy, but the crushing weight of fear that accompanied every mission. "The trick isn't not being scared," Nathaniel had told him during a particularly tense night watch. "The trick is not letting the fear make decisions for you." Orion had been there too, lying between them, his presence a comfort in the darkness. Alvarez had reached out hesitantly, asking if it was okay to pet him. "He's working," Nathaniel had replied. But then, seeing the disappointment on the young soldier's face, he had relented. "But I guess a quick scratch behind the ears won't hurt his concentration too much." That small kindness had meant everything to Alvarez, who had been homesick and frightened. Over the months that followed, he had watched the seamless partnership between Nathaniel and Orion with awe. They moved as one entity, communicating without words, anticipating dangers before they materialized. Now, seeing Orion respond to something invisible, Alvarez couldn't shake the feeling that perhaps Nathaniel wasn't as gone as they all thought. Perhaps some part of him lingered, unwilling to leave his partner behind. The chaplain inhaled sharply, his hands tightening around the small Bible he held. His expression was unreadable, but his fingers trembled slightly. "Sometimes," he said, barely above a whisper, "dogs see what we cannot." The words sent a ripple of unease through the room. Some soldiers shifted in their seats. Others sat frozen, watching Orion with a mix of curiosity and something dangerously close to fear. Chaplain Reynolds' words hung in the air, heavy with implication. He had not spoken lightly. In his years of ministry, he had heard countless stories of animals sensing things beyond human perception. Dogs who knew when their owners were coming home long before they arrived. Cats who refused to leave the bedside of the dying. Horses who grew agitated before natural disaster struck. There was something about animals, something pure and unclouded by human rationality, that seemed to connect them to aspects of reality that humans had long forgotten how to perceive. The chaplain's own grandfather, a man of unwavering faith, had often spoken of the thin places, moments when the boundary between this world and the next seemed to dissolve, allowing glimpses of something beyond. Reynolds had always interpreted these stories metaphorically, as expressions of faith rather than literal descriptions of reality. But watching Orion now, he found himself reconsidering. What if there were indeed aspects of existence that humans, with all their intellectual sophistication, had lost the ability to perceive? What if animals, unburdened by the complex rationality that both elevated and limited human experience, could still sense these dimensions? Then just as suddenly as it began, Orion blinked and exhaled a deep sigh. His body softened, tail curling loosely around his side. He turned his head, looking at Nathaniel's face one last time before lowering it to his chest. The chapel remained utterly still, as if waiting for something else to happen, but nothing did. Clara let out a shaky breath and moved closer. Carefully, she reached out, running her fingers gently over Orion's fur. He didn't flinch or resist. Whatever he had seen, if anything at all, was gone now. Yet the feeling in the chapel, that strange, indescribable shift in the air, lingered, and no one dared to speak of it. The weight of silence remained unbroken. No one spoke or moved. Even the air felt different, thicker and charged with something unseen. Orion lay still, his body pressed against Nathaniel's, breathing slow and deep, as if the full weight of grief had settled on him. Clara knelt beside the casket, fingers tangled in Orion's fur. Her hands trembled, chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. She had spent the last few days grappling with the reality of Nathaniel's death, but now, watching Orion, she felt as though she were losing him all over again. "I can't believe he's gone," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I thought he would always come home." The ache in her chest was unbearable, and she wanted to comfort Orion, assure him that everything would be all right. But the words caught in her throat. How could she promise something she wasn't sure of herself? Dr. Sophia Chen, the military veterinarian who had cared for Orion since he was first paired with Nathaniel, watched from the back of the chapel with a professional detachment that was rapidly crumbling. She had seen many working dogs grieve for their handlers, had documented the behavioral changes, the depression, the loss of appetite that often followed such separations. But Orion's reaction was beyond anything in her experience. Most dogs, even those with strong bonds to their handlers, eventually accepted a new reality. They might mourn, but their instinct for survival, for adaptation, would ultimately prevail. What she was witnessing with Orion, however, was different. There was a depth to his grief that seemed almost human in its complexity. Chen had been the one to examine Orion upon his return from the mission that had claimed Nathaniel's life. The dog had been physically unharmed, but his behavior had immediately concerned her. He had refused food, ignored commands from other handlers, and spent hours staring at the entrance to the barracks as if waiting for Nathaniel to walk through the door. When the decision was made to bring Orion to the funeral, Chen had expressed reservations. She worried that exposing him to Nathaniel's body might traumatize him further, might cement the loss in a way that would make his eventual recovery even more difficult. But watching him now, she wondered if perhaps this was what he needed, a chance to say goodbye, to understand in whatever way dogs understood such things, that his handler was truly gone. Sergeant Carter cleared his throat, his voice strained. Orion's never acted like this before. His gaze flickered between the dog and Nathaniel's still body, uncertainty clouding his features. The other soldiers nodded silently, sharing in the disbelief. They had seen Orion in combat, fierce and disciplined, unwavering, but now he looked lost, defeated. The chaplain shifted uncomfortably. "Dogs don't grieve like we do," he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. "But they do understand loss." His fingers tightened around the Bible in his lap. "Sometimes they hold on longer than we think possible." His voice trailed off, and then Orion moved, slowly, almost reluctantly. He lifted his head and looked at Nathaniel's face, letting out a soft whimper, nudging the soldier's chin with his nose. A pause, an agonizing moment of stillness, and then in one swift motion, he straightened, ears high, posture alert. The shift was subtle but unmistakable, as though he were waiting for something, a command, an order, permission to leave his post. Clara felt her breath catch. She turned toward the chaplain, her voice barely a whisper. "Is he—" She couldn't finish the sentence, but the chaplain understood. He exhaled slowly, his gaze softening as he looked at Orion, and then in a voice steady and low, he said the words that no one else dared to utter. "At ease, soldier." Orion's ears twitched, and his gaze remained locked on Nathaniel's still face for a long, agonizing moment. Then his muscles relaxed, tail uncurled slightly, breathing slowed. It was as if he had finally received the order he needed to let go. Clara wiped at her eyes, barely holding back a sob. The soldiers in the room remained silent, watching as Orion lay his head down one last time. This time he wasn't waiting for Nathaniel to wake. He was saying goodbye. Lieutenant James Harrison, who had been Nathaniel's roommate during their first deployment, felt a lump form in his throat. He had seen Nathaniel and Orion together almost daily for years, had witnessed the evolution of their partnership from a professional arrangement to something far deeper. He remembered the night Nathaniel had confided in him about his fears. They had been sitting outside their tent, sharing a rare moment of downtime. The desert night was cold, the stars brilliant overhead. Nathaniel had been unusually quiet, absently stroking Orion's fur as the dog dozed beside him. "You ever think about what happens to them?" Nathaniel had asked suddenly. "The dogs, I mean. If something happens to us." Harrison had shrugged. "They get reassigned, I guess, or sent back for retraining." Nathaniel had frowned, his hand stilling on Orion's back. "That's what I'm afraid of. He deserves better than being passed around like equipment." What's the alternative?" "I don't know. I wish there was a way to make sure he'd be okay, that he'd be with someone who understood him, you know?" Harrison had laughed, trying to lighten the mood. "You're talking about him like he's your kid." Nathaniel hadn't laughed. Instead, he had looked down at Orion with an expression that Harrison now recognized as love. "In some ways, he kind of is." Now, watching Orion say goodbye, Harrison understood what Nathaniel had meant. The bond between them had transcended the typical handler-K9 relationship. They had been family. The weight in the chapel was unbearable. Every person in the room felt it. Something deeper than grief, heavier than sorrow. It was the moment before goodbye, a silent stillness that stretched long and endless, as if time itself had slowed in reverence. Orion, once rigid with resistance, now lay still, head resting against Nathaniel's chest. His body had relaxed, yet his eyes remained open, vigilantly watching. Clara sat beside the casket, hands buried in Orion's fur. Tears had ceased to flow, not because the pain had lessened, but because she had none left to shed. She had spent her whole life believing death was the end, that when someone was gone, they were simply gone. But watching Orion's quiet, unwavering devotion, she began to wonder if perhaps she had been wrong. Maybe love, true and unbreakable love, didn't vanish. Perhaps it lingered, refusing to be erased. The memories of her childhood with Nathaniel rushed through Clara's mind like a river breaking through a dam. They had grown up in a small town in Ohio, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table. Nathaniel, 4 years older than Clara, had taken on the role of protector early in life. He walked her to school, helped with her homework, scared away the bullies who teased her about her second-hand clothes. When their mother was diagnosed with cancer during Clara's sophomore year of high school, Nathaniel had just graduated. He had put his own plans on hold, taking a job at the local factory to help with bills. Night after night, Clara would find him at the kitchen table, poring over medical bills, his young face lined with worry beyond his years. After their mother passed, it had been just the two of them. Nathaniel had insisted Clara go to college, using the small life insurance payout to cover what scholarships didn't. "You're the smart one," he had told her. "You're going to do something important." When he enlisted a year later, Clara had been furious. They had fought, their first real argument in years. She accused him of abandoning her. He insisted he was doing what made sense for both of them. "The military will give me purpose, Clara," he had said, his voice steady despite the hurt in his eyes. "And the benefits will help you finish school without drowning in debt." It had taken her years to understand that Nathaniel's decision hadn't been about leaving her, but about ensuring she had the Then the first shot rang out. The 21-gun salute shattered the silence, each blast cutting through the air like a heartbeat. The soldiers outside firing in perfect unison, their movements synchronized, faces unreadable. Clara flinched with each shot, but Orion remained perfectly still, gaze fixed on the casket, ears high. He didn't flinch or whimper. He simply watched, standing guard one last time. The crisp November air carried the sound of the gunshots across the cemetery, where a small crowd of civilians had gathered at a respectful distance. Among them stood Thomas Miller, Nathaniel's childhood friend. They had grown up together in the same small town, attended the same schools, shared the same dreams of escaping to somewhere bigger, somewhere that offered more opportunities than their struggling community could provide. Their paths had diverged after high school, Thomas to community college, Nathaniel to the military. But they had remained connected, exchanging emails and meeting up whenever Nathaniel was on leave. Thomas had been the one person outside of the military who truly understood who Nathaniel was, not just as a soldier, but as a man with doubts, fears, and hopes for the future. The last time they had spoken, just 3 weeks before Nathaniel's death, they had video called. Nathaniel had been sitting outside his barracks, Orion at his side. They had talked about normal things: Thomas's new job, Nathaniel's plans after his service ended, a mutual friend's upcoming wedding. There had been no premonition of disaster, no foreshadowing of the tragedy that would soon unfold. Just two friends catching up, making plans for a future that would never come. Now, standing at the edge of the cemetery, Thomas felt like an outsider. The military had its own way of grieving, its own rituals and traditions, the precise movements of the honor guard, the carefully scripted words of the chaplain. It all seemed so formal, so controlled. But Thomas knew that beneath the discipline and protocol, these people had loved Nathaniel too, in their own way. They had been his second family, his brothers and sisters in arms. As the 21-gun salute echoed across the cemetery, Thomas noticed a young woman standing apart from the main funeral party. She was dressed in civilian clothes, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face pale with grief. Something about her seemed familiar, and with a start, Thomas realized who she must be. Eliza Donovan, the woman Nathaniel had been seeing for the past year. Nathaniel had been private about his relationship with Eliza, sharing only the basics with Thomas. They had met during one of Nathaniel's leaves, a chance encounter at a coffee shop near the base. She was a graduate student in veterinary medicine, which had given them an immediate connection through Orion. Their relationship had developed slowly, cautiously, both aware of the challenges that came with loving someone in the military. Thomas had teased Nathaniel about it during their last call. "So, is she the one?" he had asked, half joking. Nathaniel's response had been unexpectedly serious. "I think she might be," he had admitted, a rare vulnerability in his voice. "But it's complicated. With my deployment schedule, with Orion, with everything." "Life's always complicated," Thomas had replied. "Doesn't mean you shouldn't go for it." Nathaniel had smiled, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "Maybe you're right. Maybe when I get back. But there would be no when I get back." That future, like so many others, had been erased in a single moment of violence halfway around the world. Then came the sound that broke everyone. A single, haunting note. The bugler lifted his trumpet, pressing it against his lips, and began to play taps. The melody wafted through the chapel, slow and mournful, each note sinking deep into the hearts of those who listened. Orion's head lowered, ears drooping, his body once tense, seemed to deflate as the song reached its final notes. The last sound faded into silence, and in that moment Orion did something no one expected. He lay down beside the casket, pressing his body close to where Nathaniel rested, letting out a deep, heavy sigh, not of sadness, but of acceptance. The echoes of taps faded into the cold air, leaving behind a silence so deep it felt suffocating. No one moved, no one spoke. Even the wind outside had quieted, as if the entire world had paused to mourn the loss of Sergeant Nathaniel Foster. Corporal Ryan Jenkins, who had been assigned to Nathaniel's unit just 6 months ago, felt a tear slide down his cheek. He wiped it away quickly, hoping no one had noticed. As the newest member of the team, he had been eager to prove himself, to show that he belonged among these seasoned soldiers. Nathaniel had seen through his bravado immediately. "You don't have to try so hard," Nathaniel had told him during their first patrol together. "Just do your job, watch your teammates' backs, and stay alive. That's all any of us are trying to do." It had been a simple statement, but it had changed something for Jenkins. The pressure to impress, to be someone he wasn't, had eased. He had started to find his place within the unit, guided by Nathaniel's quiet leadership and unwavering support. One night during a particularly tense period, when intelligence had indicated possible enemy activity in their area, Jenkins had been unable to sleep. He had wandered outside, finding Nathaniel sitting alone, Orion at his feet. Without a word, Nathaniel had moved over, making space for Jenkins to join them. They had sat in silence for a while, watching the stars. Then Nathaniel had spoken, his voice low. "First deployment's the hardest, not because of the danger, but because of the waiting, the not knowing. It gets in your head." Jenkins had nodded, relieved that someone understood. "How do you deal with it?" Nathaniel had glanced down at Orion, who was alert despite the late hour. "You find something to focus on besides yourself. For me, it's him. Making sure he's okay, that he has what he needs. Keeps me from dwelling too much on what might happen." It had been a simple piece of advice, but Jenkins had taken it to heart. He had found his own focus, letters to his younger sister, detailed and frequent, giving her glimpses of his life without the fear or danger. It had helped, just as Nathaniel had said it would. Now, watching Orion's profound grief, Jenkins felt a renewed sense of loss. Nathaniel had been more than a fellow soldier. He had been a mentor, a guide through the complexities of military life. And now he was gone, leaving behind a void that seemed impossible to fill. Orion remained lying beside the casket, his body pressed against it as if refusing to let go. His breathing was steady now, calmer than before, but his eyes held a distant sorrow. He had been trained to fight, to protect, to never leave his handler's side. And yet, for the first time, he had no orders to follow, no mission to complete, only an emptiness that stretched endlessly before him. Clara sat with the folded flag clutched tightly against her chest. It still carried the warmth of the soldier who had handed it to her. But even that heat was beginning to fade. Her fingers trembled as she traced the perfectly pressed folds, her throat tightening with the weight of reality. Nathaniel was really gone. There was no waking from this, no phone calls, no letters from deployment. Just this flag, this funeral, and the unbearable absence of her brother. In the days following Nathaniel's death, Clara had moved through her life like a ghost. She had made the necessary arrangements, filled out the required paperwork, notified distant relatives. She had cleaned her guest room, where Nathaniel stayed during his visits home, folding his spare clothes with careful precision, as if preserving them might somehow preserve him too. She had found a photo album in his duffel bag, something she hadn't known he kept. Inside were pictures of their childhood, their mother, their small hometown, and newer photos. Nathaniel with his unit, Nathaniel with Orion, Nathaniel standing beside a pretty dark-haired woman Clara didn't recognize. On the back of this last photo, he had written a single word, Eliza. Clara had spent hours staring at that photo, wondering who Eliza was, what she had meant to Nathaniel. She had searched through his belongings for clues, a letter, a note, anything that might tell her more about this woman who had been part of her brother's life. But there was nothing else, just the photo and the name. It was one more reminder of how much of Nathaniel's life had been unknown to her. Despite their childhood closeness, despite the renewed connection they had found in recent years, there were still vast portions of his existence that remained mysteries to her, and now they always would. Sergeant Carter stepped forward, his voice laced with grief. "We should take Orion outside, Sana," he murmured, glancing at the chaplain. "The service is almost over." Clara turned her gaze to Orion. He hadn't moved since taps ended, his body still curled protectively beside the casket. Gently, she reached out and ran her fingers through his fur. "Orion," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. The dog didn't react. Carter knelt beside him, his movements slow and careful. "Come on, buddy," he said softly. "It's time." Orion finally shifted, but it was not an act of obedience, it was reluctance. Slowly, painstakingly, he lifted his head, ears flicking back as if listening for something no one else could hear. Then after one last nuzzle against the casket, he rose to his feet. A sigh of relief rippled through the chapel. But then Orion did something that made Clara's heart stop. He turned away from Nathaniel's casket, took 3 slow steps forward, then suddenly turned back. His ears perked, tail wagging just once, as if he had seen something, as if someone had called his name. Clara's breath hitched, and Carter's brow furrowed. The chaplain whispered a quiet prayer under his breath. Major Reeves, who had been observing from her position near the back of the chapel, felt a chill run down her spine. In her 15 years of military service, she had attended more funerals than she cared to count. She had seen grief in all its forms, raw and uncontrolled, quiet and dignified, angry and bitter. But she had never seen anything like this. Orion's behavior defied explanation. The dog was impeccably trained, disciplined to respond only to specific commands and cues. This unexpected turn, this apparent response to something unseen, was so far outside the norm that it left her momentarily shaken. Reeves considered herself a practical woman. She dealt in facts, in measurable outcomes, in clear chains of command. The supernatural, the unexplainable, these had no place in her worldview. And yet, watching Orion's focused attention on empty space, she found herself questioning her certainties. She thought of her grandmother, a woman of deep faith who had often spoken of signs and visitations. "The dead are never truly gone," she would say. "They're just waiting on the other side, watching over us." As a child, Reeves had found comfort in these words. As an adult, she had dismissed them as well-intentioned, but ultimately misguided attempts to make sense of loss. Now, she wasn't so sure. Perhaps there were things beyond human understanding, things that animals, with their simpler but in some ways more acute perceptions, could still sense. Perhaps Nathaniel was there, in some form saying a final goodbye to his loyal partner. The thought should have been unsettling, but instead Reeves found it strangely comforting. If there was something beyond this life, if the bonds formed in this world could somehow transcend death, then perhaps the sacrifices made in service weren't quite so final, quite so absolute. Orion lingered for a second longer, his deep brown eyes locked on something unseen. Then just as quickly as the moment arrived, it passed. He lowered his head, his body finally accepting the weight of farewell, and walked toward the chapel doors. Clara felt a cold shiver run down her spine, because for a split second, she could have sworn Orion had been looking at Nathaniel. The chapel doors groaned as they swung open, letting in a gust of cold air. Orion stepped forward slowly, paws making no sound against the polished floor. The moment he crossed the threshold, a shiver ran down Clara's spine. The weight of the ceremony, the loss, the finality of it all pressed down on her. But something else lingered in the air, something she couldn't explain. She clutched the folded flag tighter against her chest, watching as Orion hesitated just outside the chapel. He turned his head slightly, glancing over his shoulder, not at the people, not at the casket, but at the empty space near the altar. His ears twitched, his posture stiffened. It was brief, barely noticeable, but Clara saw it, and she knew Sergeant Carter noticed it too. He inhaled sharply, glancing between Orion and the silent space he was staring at. "You saw that, right?" he muttered under his breath. Clara could only nod, unable to articulate her disbelief. Dr. Chen, who had been watching Orion with professional interest throughout the service, found herself at a loss to explain what she had just witnessed. As a veterinarian with specialized training in military working dogs, she prided herself on her understanding of canine behavior. She could interpret the subtle shifts in posture, the minute changes in ear position, the variations in tail movement that signaled a dog's emotional state. But Orion's behavior fell outside her realm of expertise. The way he had turned back, the brief wag of his tail, the focused attention on empty space, these weren't typical grief responses. They were recognition signals, the kind a dog might give when greeting a familiar person after a brief absence. Chen had read studies about dogs' sensory capabilities, their ability to detect changes in scent, in electromagnetic fields, in subtle environmental shifts that humans couldn't perceive. She knew that some researchers believed dogs could sense impending natural disasters, detect certain diseases before they showed symptoms, even anticipate seizures in patients with epilepsy. Was it possible that Orion was sensing something similar? Some lingering energy? Some trace of Nathaniel that human senses couldn't detect? The scientific part of her mind rejected this explanation as too speculative, too mystical. But the part of her that had spent years working with these extraordinary animals, witnessing their intelligence and intuition firsthand, wasn't so quick to dismiss the possibility. Whatever Orion had perceived, it had provided him with something he needed, some form of closure, some final connection with his handler. And for that, Chen was grateful. She had seen too many working dogs struggle after losing their handlers, some never fully recovering from the trauma. If this strange moment helped Orion accept Nathaniel's death, then perhaps it didn't matter whether it could be explained by science or not. The chaplain, who had remained quiet since taps, finally broke the silence. Sometimes, he murmured, his voice solemn, love doesn't leave so easily. His words sent a chill through Clara's bones. She had never been one to believe in spirits, in things beyond this world. But the way Orion had looked back, the subtle flick of his tail, as if recognizing someone, unsettled her. Outside, the funeral procession awaited. Soldiers stood in perfect formation, faces stoic, hands clasped behind their backs. The hearse gleamed in the afternoon sun, ready to carry Nathaniel to his final resting place. It was time. The world was moving forward, but Orion stayed frozen at the doorway, deep brown eyes fixed on the empty space inside the chapel. And Clara swore she saw something flicker in them. Recognition, longing, or perhaps even peace. With one last slow breath, Orion lowered his head and stepped into the sunlight. Clara followed, her heart pounding. She didn't know what she had just witnessed. Maybe it was nothing, just grief playing tricks on her mind. Or maybe, just maybe, Nathaniel had never truly left. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the cemetery. The folded flag in Clara's arms felt heavier with each step, as if the weight of Nathaniel's absence settled into her bones. Eliza Donovan watched the procession from a distance, her heart breaking anew with each passing moment. She had debated whether to attend the funeral at all. Her relationship with Nathaniel had been private, known to few. They had both preferred it that way, a quiet sanctuary away from the demands of his military life and her academic pursuits. They had met by chance in a coffee shop near the base. She had been studying for her veterinary boards, surrounded by textbooks and empty coffee cups. He had been on a rare day off, Orion at his side. It was the dog who had initiated their meeting, tugging on his leash to approach her table, curious about the woman who smelled of other animals. Nathaniel had apologized for the intrusion, but Eliza had welcomed it. As a veterinary student with a special interest in working dogs, she had been fascinated by Orion. Their conversation had flowed easily, moving from dogs to their respective backgrounds, to books they had read and places they hoped to visit. By the time the coffee shop closed, they had exchanged numbers, both knowing that something significant had begun. Their relationship had developed slowly, constrained by his deployments in her demanding study schedule. They had carved out moments together, weekend visits when he was stateside, long video calls when he was overseas, letters that crossed continents to reach each other. It wasn't conventional, but it was theirs, and it had been enough. Or at least they had told themselves it was enough. In truth, they had both been waiting for his service to end, for her studies to be completed, for their real life together to begin. They had made plans, tentative at first, then increasingly concrete. A small house somewhere quiet, room for Orion to run, maybe more dogs in the future. a life built around the things they both loved. Now those plans were ashes, scattered by the same explosion that had taken Nathaniel's life. Eliza had received the news not from the military. She had no official status in Nathaniel's life, but from a brief, compassionate email from Sergeant Carter, whom Nathaniel had apparently designated as his emergency contact for personal matters. The email had been respectful but sparse on details, offering condolences and basic information about the funeral. It had mentioned Orion, noting that the dog had been uninjured in the attack, but was showing signs of distress. Eliza had read those words and wept, knowing exactly what they meant. Orion, like her, had lost the center of his world. Now, watching the funeral procession, Eliza's eyes fixed on the German shepherd walking beside Clara Foster. She had never met Nathaniel's sister, but she recognized her from photos Nathaniel had shared. She wondered if Clara knew about her, if Nathaniel had ever mentioned the woman he was seeing. Probably not. He had been protective of their relationship, concerned about maintaining boundaries between his military life and his personal one. Eliza considered approaching Clara after the service, introducing herself, sharing her connection to Nathaniel. But what would that accomplish beyond adding to Clara's emotional burden? Be better, perhaps, to grieve privately, to honor Nathaniel's memory in her own way. And yet, watching Orion's solemn procession toward the gravesite, Eliza felt a pull she couldn't ignore. She had loved not just Nathaniel, but Orion too. And now they were both lost to her. Orion walked beside Clara, movement slow but steady. His usual alertness was subdued, ears slightly lowered, tail hanging still. He had followed Nathaniel through war zones, chaos and danger, and now he was following him one last time. The casket was placed with precision above the open grave, and the chaplain stepped forward, voice steady despite the sorrow that filled the air. Sergeant Nathaniel Foster dedicated his life to service, to his country, to his fellow soldiers, and to the bond that can never be broken between a man and his K9 partner. He glanced at Orion, his eyes softening. Even now, that bond remains. Clara felt her throat tighten. The soldiers around her remained motionless, but their grief was palpable. Carter stood with hands clasped, jaw tight, eyes locked on the casket. No matter how many times they had stood at funerals like this, it never got easier. Then Orion did something that made Clara's breath hitch. He moved forward, stepping right up to the casket. His nose twitched as he sniffed the polished wood, eyes filled with something deeper than sadness, understanding. He let out a slow exhale, then straightened, standing tall, proud. With deliberate precision, he lifted his paw and placed it gently on the casket. The cemetery fell into complete silence. Soldiers who had held their composure wiped their eyes. Clara pressed her lips together to keep from breaking. Carter turned his head slightly, Told her about Mom, about Clara. Easier to talk about it than I expected. She didn't offer platitudes, just listened. Asked questions that showed she was really hearing me. Kissed her goodnight. Didn't want to leave. February 20th, deployment in 2 days. Spent the weekend with Eliza. She's worried but trying not to show it. Promised to write, to call when I can. Left Orion's favorite toy with her so she'd have something of ours while we're gone. This is harder than I expected. I've never had someone like this to leave behind before. Makes me think about the future in a way I haven't allowed myself to for a long time. The entries continued through his deployment. Brief notes about receiving her letters, about their video calls, about how thoughts of her kept him going during difficult moments. Then after his return, September 8th, home, Eliza met us at the base. Orion nearly knocked her over. He was so excited to see her, know exactly how he felt. Everything feels different this time. Usually coming back is an adjustment, a period of feeling out of place in the civilian world. But being with her, it's like I never left, like I've come home to something real, not just a break between deployments. Scary thought, exhilarating too. October 12th, took Eliza to meet Clara today. Didn't tell either of them it was happening. Coward's way out, I know. Couldn't figure out how to explain to Clara that I've been seeing someone seriously without having told her about it for months. And didn't want Eliza to feel nervous about meeting my sister. So I just arranged for us to run into Clara at the farmer's market she always visits on Saturdays. It was awkward for about 5 minutes. Then they were talking about some book they'd both read, and I was just standing there holding their shopping bags. Should have known they'd get along. They're the two smartest women I know. Clara stopped reading, her heart pounding. She had no memory of this meeting. She thought back to last October, trying to recall a chance encounter at the farmer's market. There had been so many Saturdays, so many brief interactions with acquaintances. Had she really met Eliza before and not remembered? Or had Nathaniel written about a plan that never came to fruition? She continued reading, and a few entries later found her answer. October 15th, chickened out at the farmer's market. Saw Clara from a distance, but couldn't make myself approach her with Eliza. What am I so afraid of? That they won't like each other? That making this introduction somehow makes everything more real, more serious? Need to stop overthinking this. We'll properly introduce them when I get back from this next deployment. No more excuses. Clara felt a pang of sadness and regret. Nathaniel had wanted them to meet, had planned for it, but had run out of time. She wondered what he would think now, knowing that his sister and girlfriend had found each other after his death, had formed a connection that was helping both of them navigate their grief. The final entry in the journal was dated just 3 days before Nathaniel's death. November 2nd. Bad feeling about tomorrow's mission. Intel is sketchy, too many unknowns. Can't share specifics, even here. But something doesn't feel right. Talked to Carter about it, but there's nothing to be done. Orders are orders. Called Eliza earlier. Didn't tell her anything to worry her, just wanted to hear her voice. She was excited about an internship opportunity that would let her work specifically with service and working dogs. Listening to her talk about her dreams, I realized I'm ready for something different. This tour ends in 4 months, thinking it might be my last. Time to build something that lasts. Time to come home for good. Made arrangements with Carter, just in case. He'll make sure Orion is taken care of. We'll contact Eliza personally rather than leaving it to the official channels. She deserves better than a form letter or a stranger at her door. Asked him to look out for Clara too. He's a good friend, one of the best. I'm not typically superstitious, but if anything happens to me, I hope whoever finds this journal makes sure Clara and Eliza get to know each other. They're the two most important people in my life, besides Orion. They should know each other. They'd like each other, I think. Both stubborn as hell, both smarter than me, both with this capacity for caring that amazes me. If I don't make it back, I hope they find each other. I hope they help each other through it. I hope they take care of Orion together. He needs them both. Clara closed the journal, tears streaming down her face. Orion, sensing her distress, moved closer, resting his head on her knee. She stroked his fur absently, her mind full of Nathaniel's last wishes, his hopes for the people he loved. When Eliza arrived an hour later, Clara wordlessly handed her the journal. They sat together on the couch, Orion between them, as Eliza read Nathaniel's final entry. When she finished, she looked up, her eyes shining with tears. "He knew," she said softly. Somehow he knew. Clara nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. After a moment, she managed, "He wanted us to know each other, to be in each other's lives." "We are," Eliza said simply. "We found each other, just like he hoped we would." They sat in silence for a while, each lost in her own thoughts, connected by the words of the man they had both loved, by the dog who now looked between them with watchful eyes, and by a grief that, while still acute, had begun to transform into something else, a shared understanding, a mutual support, a tentative friendship that honored Nathaniel's memory by moving forward together. Later that night, after Eliza had gone home and Clara was preparing for bed, she found herself standing in the spare room that had been Nathaniel's when he visited. It was largely unchanged since his last stay. His spare running shoes still by the door, a few books on the nightstand, a hoodie draped over the chair. She had been unable to pack these things away, to erase these small signs of his presence. Orion followed her into the room, his nails clicking softly on the hardwood floor. He went immediately to the bed, jumping up and settling on the side where Nathaniel had slept. It was a breach of his usual discipline. He typically waited for permission before getting on furniture. But Clara couldn't bring herself to correct him. Instead, she sat beside him, running her hand over the quilt that still, faintly, carried her brother's scent. "You miss him too, don't you?" she said softly. Orion looked at her, his deep brown eyes seeming to understand every word. "I'm not him. I can't be what he was to you. But I'm trying, Orion. I'm trying to be what you need now." Orion shifted closer, resting his head against her leg. It was a simple gesture, but it conveyed a world of meaning, acceptance, trust, the beginnings of a bond that, while different from what he had shared with Nathaniel, was genuine and growing stronger each day. Clara sat with him for a long time, thinking about Nathaniel's journal, about his hopes for those he left behind. She thought about Eliza, about the unexpected friendship they were building, about the way Orion connected them. And she thought about the future, uncertain, altered from what any of them had planned, but not without possibility, not without moments of connection and even joy. "We're going to be okay," she whispered, as much to herself as to Orion. "Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. We're going to be okay." Orion sighed deeply, his body relaxing against hers. And for the first time since receiving the news of Nathaniel's death, Clara believed her own words. They would be okay, different, changed, carrying scars that would never fully heal, but okay. It was enough for now. It was a beginning. The decision about Orion's future came to a head in early December, when Sergeant Carter called to inform Clara that the military was ready to process Orion's retirement. "Given his age and the circumstances," Carter said carefully, "the K9 unit agrees that retirement is the best option. The question is, what happens next?" Clara had been thinking about this question for weeks, turning it over in her mind, discussing it with Eliza during their evening visits. The options seemed clear. Clara could adopt Orion, providing him with a home where he was already comfortable, where Nathaniel's memory was honored. Eliza could try to find a pet-friendly apartment and take him, offering the expertise of a soon-to-be veterinarian and the comfort of another familiar presence. Or they could allow the military to place him with an approved family, perhaps another veteran who understood the unique needs of a retired working dog. None of these options felt entirely right. Clara loved Orion, had grown accustomed to his presence in her home, but she worried about her long work hours, about her lack of experience with dogs, about whether she could provide the structure and stimulation he needed. Eliza had the knowledge and the deep connection with Orion, but her student housing, busy schedule, and limited finances made adoption practically impossible for her at this stage of her life. "I need a little more time," Clara told Carter. just to figure out what's best for him. Carter agreed to delay the paperwork, but warned her that a decision would need to be made soon. The longer he stays in limbo, the harder the transition will be, whatever you decide. That evening, when Eliza arrived for their now customary dinner and walk with Orion, Clara shared the conversation with her. They sat at Clara's small dining table, the remains of a simple pasta dinner between them, Orion lying at their feet. "So we need to decide," Clara concluded. "Soon." Eliza nodded, her expression thoughtful. "What are you thinking?" Clara sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I'm thinking that I love having him here. He's a connection to Nathaniel, but he's also become important to me in his own right. But I'm not sure I'm the best option for him. My hours are long. I don't know enough about what he needs. And this apartment, while it allows pets, isn't ideal for a dog his size." "You're doing wonderfully with him," Eliza said, her voice warm with encouragement. "He's adjusted well, he's healthy, he seems content." "Because you're here almost every day," Clara pointed out. "You're the one who knows what he needs, who understands his signals, who can tell when something's wrong. Without you, I would have been lost." Eliza looked down, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "I just happen to have the training. You have the bond with him. You're his family now." "So are you," Clara said firmly. "You were part of Nathaniel's life, which makes you part of Orion's life too." She hesitated, then added, "And mine, if you want to be." Eliza looked up, surprise and something like hope in her expression. "What are you saying?" Clara took a deep breath. The idea had been forming in her mind for days, but speaking it aloud made it real, made it something that could be accepted or rejected. "I'm saying that maybe there's a third option, not you or me, but both of us, together." Eliza's brow furrowed in confusion. "I don't understand." "Move in with me," Clara said simply. "Here, or somewhere new if this place is too small. We can share Orion's care. You have the knowledge, I have the stability. Between us, we can give him everything he needs." Eliza stared at her, clearly stunned by the suggestion. "Clara, that's a huge commitment. We've only known each other for a few weeks." "I know," Clara acknowledged, "and under normal circumstances, it would be crazy. But these aren't normal circumstances. We're connected. Through Nathaniel, through Orion, through everything we've shared since the funeral, and it makes practical sense. You're here most evenings anyway. Your student housing is expensive and doesn't allow pets. My place is close to both the hospital where I work and the veterinary school. We get along well. And most importantly, it would be best for Orion." At the sound of his name, Orion lifted his head, looking between them with interest. Eliza reached down to stroke his fur, her expression thoughtful. "It would solve a lot of problems," she admitted. "But what happens when I graduate? When I get a job that might be in another city? When you meet someone and want your space back?" "We'll figure it out when we get there," Clara said. "Nothing has to be permanent. But for now, for this moment in our lives, I think it makes sense. For all of us." Eliza was quiet for a long moment, her hand still moving through Orion's fur. Finally, she looked up, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Nathaniel would think we're crazy." Clara laughed, feeling some of the tension ease. "Probably, but he'd also be relieved that we're taking care of each other, that we're taking care of Orion together. Like he hoped we would," Eliza said softly, remembering the words from his journal. "Exactly like that." Eliza took a deep breath and nodded. "Okay, let's do it. Let's try at least for Orion, for Nathaniel, for us." The relief Clara felt was immediate and profound. It wasn't just about solving the practical problem of Orion's care. It was about not facing the future alone, about honoring Nathaniel's memory through this unexpected connection, about building something new from the ashes of loss. Orion, as if sensing the significance of the moment, stood up and moved between them, pressing his body against their legs, connecting them physically as they were already connected emotionally. Clara reached down to pet him, her hand brushing against Eliza's, and in that simple touch, she felt a promise, not of an easy path forward, but of one they would walk together, guided by the love they had shared for Nathaniel and the love they were beginning to feel for each other as friends as family, as whatever they might become. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Eliza gave notice at her student housing. Clara cleared out the spare room that had been Nathaniel's, and together they transformed it into a space for Eliza. They bought a new bed, rearranged furniture, made room in closets and drawers. It was a physical manifestation of the space they were creating in their lives for each other, for this new arrangement that defied easy categorization. Sergeant Carter processed Orion's retirement paperwork, officially transferring his care to Clara and Eliza jointly, an unusual arrangement that required some creative bureaucratic maneuvering, but was ultimately approved. The day they received the final documents, they celebrated with a special dinner for all three of them, including a steak for Orion, who accepted this extraordinary treat with dignified appreciation. Christmas approached, bringing with it a wave of grief as both women faced their first holiday season without Nathaniel. They decided to honor him by creating new traditions that incorporated his memory without being overwhelmed by his absence. They hung his dog tags on the small tree they set up in Clara's, now their, living room. They made his favorite cookies, sharing stories of past Christmases as they worked side by side in the kitchen. They bought gifts for Orion, wrapping them carefully and laughing at his puzzled interest in the rustling paper. On Christmas Eve, they took Orion for a long walk in the snow-covered park, then returned home to warm up with hot chocolate and the cookies they had baked. As they sat on the couch, Orion stretched out at their feet, the lights from the tree casting a soft glow over the room. Clara felt a sense of peace that had eluded her since Nathaniel's death. "I miss him," she said softly, watching the play of light on the dog tags hanging from a branch. "Every day I miss him. But this," she gestured around the room, at Eliza, at Orion, at the home they were building together. "This helps, knowing that his love brought us together, that we're honoring him by taking care of each other. It helps." Eliza nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "He would be happy, I think, seeing us like this, seeing Orion settled and loved." "He would," Clara agreed. She hesitated, then added, "I found something today when I was looking for the Christmas decorations. I think you should have it." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, handing it to Eliza. Eliza opened it with trembling fingers, revealing a simple silver ring set with a small sapphire. "This was our mother," Clara explained. "Nathaniel kept it after she died. I think he might have been planning to give it to you, eventually." Eliza's hand flew to her mouth, tears spilling over. "Clara, I can't." "You can," Clara said firmly. "You should. He loved you, Eliza. Maybe he didn't get the chance to tell you how much, or to give you this ring himself, but he loved you, and I know he would want you to have it." Eliza looked down at the ring, then back at Clara, her expression a mixture of grief and gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll treasure it, always." They sat in silence for a while, each lost in thoughts of Nathaniel, of the past that had brought them here, of the future that stretched before them, uncertain but faced together. Orion, sensing the emotional current in the room, moved closer, resting his head on Eliza's knee. His warm presence a comfort and a reminder of the bond that connected them all. As the snow fell softly outside, covering the world in a blanket of white, Clara thought about the strange, winding journey of the past 2 months. From the devastating news of Nathaniel's death, through the heart-wrenching funeral where Orion had refused to leave his handler's side, to this quiet Christmas Eve with Eliza and Orion. She had traversed a landscape of grief that had seemed, at times, impossible to navigate. Yet here she was, not over her loss. She would never be over it, but learning to carry it differently, to incorporate it into a life that still held meaning, connection, even moments of joy. Nathaniel was gone, but his love remained, manifested in the relationships he had fostered, in the lives he had touched, in the legacy he had left behind. Orion lifted his head suddenly, ears perked, gaze fixed on a point near the Christmas tree. His tail gave a single, tentative wag, and for a moment he seemed to be seeing something that neither Clara nor Eliza could perceive. "What is it, boy?" Eliza asked softly, following his gaze to the empty space. Orion didn't react to her voice, continuing to stare with focused attention. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the moment passed. He relaxed, settling back down with a deep sigh, his eyes drifting closed. Clara and Eliza exchanged glances, a shared understanding passing between them. Neither spoke the thought aloud, but both felt it. A presence, a warmth, a sense that, perhaps in some way they couldn't explain, Nathaniel was with them still. Not physically, not in any way that could be measured or proven, but in the connections he had forged, in the love he had given, in the lives that continued to be shaped by his brief but profound passage through the world. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the old year's scars, preparing the ground for new growth when spring returned. Inside, in the warm glow of the Christmas tree, Clara, Eliza, and Orion rested together, bound by loss but also by love, by memory but also by possibility, by a past they honored and a future they would build, step by step, day by day together. Some bonds, as Nathaniel had written in his journal, never truly break. They change, they evolve, they transform, but they endure, connecting hearts across time, across distance, even across the ultimate boundary between life and death. In Orion's steadfast loyalty, in Clara's and Eliza's unexpected friendship, in the home they were creating together, Nathaniel's love lived on, a testament to the power of connection, to the enduring nature of true devotion, to the remarkable capacity of the human heart to find light even in the darkest of times. And as the clock ticked toward midnight, as Christmas Eve gave way to Christmas Day, a sense of peace settled over the small apartment. Not the absence of grief, but its transformation into something that could coexist with hope, with healing, with the tentative beginnings of joy. It was perhaps the greatest gift Nathaniel could have given them, the knowledge that even in his absence, love remained, binding them together, carrying them forward, guiding them home. Carter nodded, then seemed to come to a decision. The reason I'm here, beyond just updating you on my plans, is to ask for your help. I'm putting together a proposal for a new program that would pair retired military working dogs with veterans suffering from PTSD. The dogs would receive training similar to what Orion has had, and the veterans would learn to work with them as handlers. It would provide purpose for both the dogs and the veterans, helping both transition to civilian life. Clara and Eliza exchanged interested glances. That sounds like an incredible program, Eliza said. How can we help? I'd like to use Orion as a case study, Carter explained. Document his transition from military service to therapy work, the training methods you've used, the impact he's having, with your permission, of course. And I'd also value your insights, particularly yours, Eliza, given your veterinary background and your experience working with him in the therapy program. We'd be honored, Clara said without hesitation. Anything that helps other dogs like Orion, other veterans like those he works with, we want to support that. Absolutely, Eliza agreed. I can share all of our training notes, connect you with Dr. Thornton, who runs the therapy dog program, even arrange for you to observe Orion during his hospital visits if that would be helpful. Carter's relief was evident. That would be incredibly helpful. Thank you. He paused, then added, there's one more thing. The program I'm envisioning would need a name, something that captures its purpose and honors the bond between handlers and their canine partners. He looked down at Orion, then back at Claire and Eliza. With your permission, I'd like to call it the Nathaniel Foster Program for K9 veterans. Clara felt her breath catch, emotion rising swiftly to the surface. Beside her, Eliza reached for her hand, squeezing it tightly. You want to name it after Nathaniel? Clara managed, her voice thick with feeling. Carter nodded, his own composure slipping slightly. He exemplified everything this program would stand for. Respect for his K9 partner, dedication to service, commitment to helping others. And his legacy, through Orion, through both of you, is already demonstrating the impact this kind of transition can have. He hesitated, then added, but only if you're comfortable with it. I wouldn't want to presume. It's perfect, Clara said, tears flowing freely now. It's exactly what Nathaniel would have wanted, to know that his name would be associated with helping both veterans and working dogs. There's no better way to honor his memory. I agree, Eliza said, her own eyes bright with tears. Nathaniel would be so proud to be part of this, even if only in name. Carter's relief was palpable. Thank you. That means more than I can express. He reached down to stroke Orion's head. And thank you, buddy, for showing us all what's possible when we find new purpose, new connections. The meeting with Carter marked the beginning of a new chapter in their journey with Orion. Over the following weeks, they worked closely with Carter on his proposal for the Nathaniel Foster program for K-9 veterans. Eliza shared her detailed notes on Orion's training, arranged for Carter to observe several therapy sessions at both the VA and children's hospitals, and connected him with Dr. Thornton, who was enthusiastic about the potential collaboration. Clara contributed in her own way, using her administrative experience to help Carter develop a budget for the program, identify potential funding sources, and create an organizational structure that would ensure sustainability. Together, they crafted a comprehensive proposal that outlined not just the practical aspects of the program, but also its philosophical foundation: the belief that both veterans and working dogs deserve respect, purpose, and the opportunity to continue serving in new ways. By late September, the proposal was ready to be presented to a coalition of veterans organizations and animal welfare groups that had expressed interest in supporting the initiative. Carter invited Clara and Eliza to attend the presentation, suggesting that Orion's presence would provide a powerful demonstration of the program's potential impact. The presentation was scheduled for a Thursday evening at a conference center near the VA hospital. Clara took the afternoon off work, and Eliza arranged for another student to cover her shift at the veterinary clinic, where she worked part-time. Together, they prepared Orion for his role, making sure his therapy dog vest was spotless and that he was well rested for the event. "Are you nervous?" Eliza asked as they drove to the conference center, Orion sitting calmly in the back seat. "A little," Clara admitted. "It's strange to think of Nathaniel's name being on an official program, becoming part of something so public. But it feels right too, like his legacy is growing beyond what any of us could have imagined." Eliza nodded, understanding in her eyes. "I keep thinking about how he would react to all of this. To us living together, to Orion's therapy work, to this program bearing his name. I think he'd be amazed, but also pleased. Don't you?" "I do," Clara agreed. "He always wanted to make a difference, to help people. This program will do that in his name long after we're all gone. It's a kind of immortality in a way." When they arrived at the conference center, Carter was waiting for them in the lobby. He looked different in his suit, more polished than they were used to seeing him, but still with the straight-back posture and alert gaze of a career soldier. "Thank you both for coming," he said, shaking their hands warmly before kneeling to greet Orion. "And thank you, partner, for being our star example today." The presentation room was already filling with representatives from various organizations: veterans advocacy groups, animal welfare organizations, a few government officials from the VA, and even some private donors who had expressed interest in the program. Carter introduced Clara and Eliza to several key figures, explaining their role in Orion's care and in developing the program concept. When it was time for the presentation to begin, Carter took the podium while Clara, Eliza, and Orion sat in the front row. He began by introducing himself and his military background, then moved smoothly into an explanation of the unique challenges faced by both veterans with PTSD and retired military working dogs. These challenges, while different in nature, share common elements, he explained: loss of purpose, difficulty adjusting to civilian environments, the need for structure and meaningful connection. The Nathaniel Foster program for K-9 veterans aims to address these challenges by creating partnerships that benefit both the veterans and the dogs. He went on to outline the program structure: how dogs would be selected and trained, how veterans would be matched with appropriate K-9 partners, the support systems that would be put in place to ensure successful transitions. Throughout, he referenced Orion as a case study, explaining how his successful transition from military service to therapy work demonstrated the potential of the approach. But perhaps the most powerful testimony comes not from me, but from those who have witnessed this transition firsthand, Carter said, turning toward Clara and Eliza. I'd like to invite Eliza Donovan, Orion's current handler and a veterinary medicine student specializing in working dogs, to share her experience. Eliza rose, momentarily surprised at being called upon, but quickly composed herself. With a reassuring nod from Clara, she moved to the podium, Orion following naturally at her side. Thank you, Sergeant Carter, she began, her voice steady despite her nervousness. As many of you know from the recent news segment, Orion served as a military working dog alongside Sergeant Nathaniel Foster for 6 years. Their partnership was exceptional, saving countless lives through their detection work in some of the most dangerous areas of operation. She paused, gathering herself before continuing. When Nathaniel was killed in action last November, Orion lost not just his handler, but his entire world. The bond between a military working dog and their handler is profound, built on absolute trust and countless hours of training and shared experience. Orion's grief was as real and as deep as any humans would be. The room was utterly silent, all eyes fixed on Eliza and Orion, who sat calmly at her feet, the very picture of dignified service. In the months that followed, Clara Foster, Nathaniel's sister, and I made the decision to adopt Orion when he retired from military service. We wanted to honor Nathaniel's memory by giving his partner the best possible life. But we quickly realized that for Orion, the best possible life wasn't just about comfort and care. It was about purpose, about continuing to serve in some capacity. She went on to describe Orion's transition to therapy work, the training process, the challenges they faced, and the remarkable impact he was having on the veterans and children he now visited regularly. What we've witnessed is nothing short of transformative, she concluded. Orion has found new purpose, new connection, and in doing so has helped dozens of veterans find their own path to healing. The Nathaniel Foster program would extend this opportunity to many more dogs like Orion and to the veterans who could benefit so profoundly from these partnerships. As Eliza returned to her seat, the applause was immediate and enthusiastic. Carter retook the podium to answer questions and provide more specific details about the program's implementation timeline and funding needs. Throughout, he handled the inquiries with confidence and clarity, his passion for the project evident in every response. By the end of the presentation, it was clear that the program had generated significant interest. Several organizations committed to providing initial funding, while others offered in-kind support in the form of training facilities, veterinary care, and administrative assistance. The VA representatives expressed strong interest in integrating the program into their existing veteran services, seeing it as a valuable addition to their PTSD treatment options. As the event wound down and attendees began to depart, Carter made his way back to Clara and Eliza, his expression a mixture of excitement and relief. That went even better than I hoped, he said, his usual reserve giving way to genuine enthusiasm. The response has been incredible. I think we're really going to make this happen. Of course we are, Clara said, smiling at his obvious joy. How could anyone resist once they understood the potential impact? And Eliza, you were amazing. Your passion for this work came through so clearly. Eliza blushed slightly at the praise. I just spoke from experience. Orion did all the real work, just by being himself. Speaking of Orion, Carter said, kneeling to stroke the dog's head, he was the perfect ambassador today. Calm, dignified, the very picture of what this program can achieve. He looked up at Clara and Eliza, his expression growing serious. I can never thank you both enough for your support, for allowing Nathaniel's name to be associated with this work. It means everything to me to honor him this way. It means everything to us too, Clara assured him. Knowing that his legacy will continue, that his commitment to service will help others long after we're gone, there's no better memorial we could imagine. As they left the conference center, walking together toward the parking lot with Orion trotting contentedly between them, Clara felt a sense of completion, of rightness. The circle that had begun with Nathaniel's death was not closing, would never truly close, but it was expanding, growing to encompass new possibilities, new connections, new ways of honoring the love that had brought them all together. The autumn months brought a flurry of activity as the Nathaniel foster program moved from concept to reality. Carter, now officially retired from the military, threw himself into the work with characteristic dedication. He secured office space near the VA hospital, hired a small staff of trainers in administrative support, and began the process of identifying the first cohort of dogs and veterans who would participate in the program. Clara and Eliza remained deeply involved, serving on the program's advisory board and contributing their expertise in various ways. Clara helped develop administrative protocols and financial systems, ensuring the program had a solid operational foundation. Eliza, drawing on her veterinary training and experience with Orion, advised on the selection and training of the dogs, emphasizing the importance of matching each animal's temperament and abilities with the specific needs of their veteran partner. Orion himself became the program's unofficial mascot, accompanying Eliza to planning meetings and training sessions when his therapy schedule allowed. His calm presence and obvious bond with both Eliza and Clara served as a powerful demonstration of what the program aimed to achieve: partnerships based on mutual respect, understanding, and shared purpose. As the program took shape, so too did Clara and Eliza's relationship. The months of living together, of sharing the care of Orion, of navigating grief and building new meaning, had created a bond between them that transcended simple friendship. They had become essential to each other, their lives intertwined in ways neither had anticipated, but both now cherished. They didn't speak of it directly, this shift in their relationship. It happened in small moments, in the way Eliza would rest her head on Clara's shoulder as they watched television in the evenings, in the way Clara would reach for Eliza's hand when they walked Orion together, in the increasingly frequent moments when their eyes would meet across a room and hold, communicating without words. It was Orion, in his own way, who finally prompted them to acknowledge what had been growing between them. One evening in late October, as they sat on the couch reviewing materials for the upcoming launch of the Nathaniel foster program, Orion did something unusual. He jumped onto the couch, a breach of his normal discipline, and positioned himself between them, his head on Clara's lap, his body pressed against Eliza's side. "Well, this is new," Clara said with a laugh, stroking his head. "What's gotten into you, buddy?" Eliza smiled, her hand joining Clara's in petting Orion. "Maybe he's tired of watching us dance around each other," she suggested, her voice light, but her eyes serious as they met Clara's. "Maybe he's decided to take matters into his own paws." Clara felt her heart rate increase, a flutter of nervous anticipation in her chest. "What do you mean?" Eliza took a deep breath, her hand stilling on Orion's fur. "I mean that I think we've become more than roommates, more than friends who share the care of a very special dog. At least that's how I feel." She paused, vulnerability clear in her expression. "But if I'm misreading things—" "You're not," Clara said quickly, reaching across Orion to take Eliza's hand. "You're not misreading anything. I feel it too. I have for a while now." Relief washed over Eliza's face, followed by a smile that lit her eyes. "Really? Because I've been trying to figure out how to talk about this. How to ask if what I was feeling was just me, or if you might—" "It's not just you," Clara assured her, squeezing her hand. "It's been growing for months, this feeling. But I wasn't sure if it was the right time, if we were ready, if you felt the same way." "I do," Eliza said simply. "I feel the same way." They looked at each other across the small space that separated them. Orion still contentedly sprawled between them, seemingly satisfied with the conversation he had prompted. Then, with a shared laugh at the absurdity and perfection of the moment, they leaned toward each other, meeting in a kiss that felt both like a beginning and a continuation. The natural next step in a journey that had started in grief but had led them, unexpectedly but inevitably, to each other. When they separated, both slightly breathless, Orion lifted his head to look between them, his expression almost smug, as if he had accomplished some long-planned mission. Clara laughed, rubbing his ears affectionately. "Was this your plan all along, buddy? To bring us together?" "If it was, he's even smarter than we thought," Eliza said, her eyes still on Clara's face. wonder and happiness evident in her expression. Maybe Nathaniel put him up to it, Clara suggested, only half joking. His final mission, Operation Matchmaker. The thought made them both laugh, but there was a poignancy to it as well, a sense that perhaps in some way they couldn't explain, Nathaniel had indeed played a role in bringing them together. Through Orion, through the shared experience of loss and healing, through the new purpose they had found together, his influence continued to shape their lives in ways that none of them could have predicted. As they settled back against the couch, now sitting closer together with Orion still between them, Clara felt a profound sense of gratitude. For Nathaniel, whose life and death had set this journey in motion. For Orion, whose unwavering loyalty and adaptability had shown them the way forward. And for Eliza, whose presence in her life had transformed grief into something new and beautiful, not erasing the loss, but adding to it, creating a balance that allowed both sorrow and joy to coexist. The official launch of the Nathaniel Foster Program for K-9 veterans took place on Veterans Day, a fitting date for an initiative dedicated to honoring and supporting those who had served. The ceremony was held at the VA hospital where Orion had been doing his therapy work, with representatives from various veterans organizations, animal welfare groups, and the media in attendance. Carter had arranged for a special tribute to Nathaniel as part of the event, a display featuring photos of him with Orion during their service together, along with a brief biography highlighting his achievements and the values that had guided his life. Clara and Eliza had helped select the images and craft the text, ensuring that it captured not just Nathaniel's military accomplishments, but also his character, his compassion, his unwavering commitment to those he served with. As they stood before the display, Orion sitting attentively between them, Clara felt a complex mixture of emotions: pride in her brother's legacy, grief at his absence, gratitude for the unexpected gifts that had emerged from his loss. Beside her, Eliza slipped a hand into hers, offering silent support and understanding. "He would love this," Eliza said softly, gazing at a particularly striking photo of Nathaniel and Orion in the field, both alert and focused, the bond between them evident even in a still image. Not the attention, he was never comfortable with that, but knowing that his work, his partnership with Orion, was inspiring others. Clara nodded, squeezing Eliza's hand. He always wanted to make a difference, and he is, even now. Through this program, through Orion, through us, his impact continues. The ceremony itself was simple but moving. Carter spoke eloquently about the program's mission, about the unique challenges faced by both veterans with PTSD and retired military working dogs, and about how the partnerships they were creating would address these challenges while honoring Nathaniel's legacy. Sergeant Nathaniel Foster exemplified the values this program stands for, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. Respect for his K-9 partner, dedication to service, commitment to helping others. Through this program, his spirit lives on, continuing to make a difference in the lives of those who have served our country. The first cohort of participants, 5 veterans and their newly assigned K-9 partners, were introduced, each pair coming forward to be recognized. The dogs, all retired military working dogs like Orion, displayed varying degrees of adjustment to their new role. Some still showing the alertness of their military training, others already exhibiting the calmer demeanor of a support animal. The veterans, too, showed a range of responses, some standing tall with military bearing, others more hesitant, clearly still struggling with the invisible wounds of their service. As Clara watched them, she was struck by the potential for healing in these new partnerships. Each veteran and dog would need to learn to trust each other, to communicate in new ways, to find purpose in this civilian context. It wouldn't be easy. There would be setbacks, challenges, moments of frustration, but the foundation was there, the possibility of mutual support and understanding that could help both human and canine partners navigate their transitions. After the ceremony, as attendees mingled and refreshments were served, one of the veterans approached Clara and Eliza. He was a young man, perhaps in his early 30s, with the lean build of a soldier, and eyes that held a wariness at odds with his youth. Beside him walked a Belgian Malinois, similar to Orion in size and coloring, but with a more restless energy. "Excuse me," he said, his voice quiet but determined. "You're Sergeant Foster's sister, right? And you're his..." He hesitated, clearly unsure how to define Eliza's relationship to Nathaniel. "I was in a relationship with Nathaniel," Eliza supplied gently, "and now I'm Orion's handler." The veteran nodded, seeming relieved at her straightforward response. "I wanted to thank you both for this program, for sharing your story. It's given me hope." He glanced down at the dog beside him, who was watching Orion with interest. "Atlas here was a patrol dog in Afghanistan. He's having a hard time adjusting to civilian life. So am I, if I'm being honest. But seeing what you've done with Orion, how he's found a new purpose, it helps to know it's possible." Clara felt a lump form in her throat at the simple honesty of his words. "What's your name?" she asked. "Michael," he replied. "Michael Rivera. I served 2 tours in Afghanistan, came home 6 months ago. It's been challenging." "It gets better," Eliza said, her voice warm with encouragement. "Not all at once and not without effort, but it does get better. Orion has taught us that. And I believe Atlas will teach you the same thing." Michael nodded, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "That's what I'm counting on." He hesitated, then added, "Your brother was known to us, you know. Even those of us who never met him personally. The K9 handlers talked about him, about how he worked with Orion. He was respected. I just thought you should know that." "Thank you," Clara said, deeply moved by this unexpected glimpse into how Nathaniel had been viewed by his peers. "That means a great deal to hear." After Michael moved on, rejoining the other veterans in his cohort, Clara turned to Eliza, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "This is really happening," she said softly. "Nathaniel's legacy, continuing through all these new partnerships." "It is," Eliza agreed, her own expression reflecting the significance of the moment. "And through us, too, through our partnership." Clara nodded, understanding the multiple layers of meaning in Eliza's words. They were partners in caring for Orion, partners in supporting the program that bore Nathaniel's name, and now partners in a relationship that had grown naturally from the soil of shared grief and purpose. As they stood together, watching the veterans and their new K9 partners begin the journey that Orion had already traveled, Clara felt a sense of completion, of rightness. The circle that had begun with Nathaniel's death was not closing, would never truly close. But it was expanding, growing to encompass new possibilities, new connections, new ways of honoring the love that had brought them all together. Orion, sitting attentively at their feet, seemed to sense the significance of the moment. He looked up at them, then at the new K9 veteran pairs, his expression as always inscrutable, yet somehow conveying understanding. In his steadfast presence, in his transition from military service to therapy work, in his role in bringing Clara and Eliza together, he embodied the legacy of the handler who had loved him, the enduring nature of bonds that transcended even death. As the event wound down and they prepared to leave, Clara knelt beside Orion, stroking his fur with gentle hands. "You've done so well, buddy," she murmured. "Nathaniel would be so proud of you, of all of us." Eliza joined her, their shoulders touching as they both petted Orion. "He is proud," she said with quiet certainty. "I believe that. Wherever he is, he knows what we've built together, and he's proud." Clara nodded, finding comfort in Eliza's words, in her presence, in the warm solidity of Orion between them. Together they had transformed grief into purpose, loss into connection, ending into beginning. It wasn't the story any of them had expected, but it was theirs, a testament to the enduring power of love, to the ways in which bonds formed in life could continue to shape and influence the world even after death. As they walked out of the hospital into the crisp November air, Orion trotting contentedly between them, Clara felt a profound sense of peace. The grief of losing Nathaniel would never completely disappear, but alongside it had grown this new connection, this unexpected family formed from the ashes of loss. It wasn't a replacement for what had been lost. Nothing could ever replace her brother, but it was a testament to the enduring power of love, to the ways in which bonds formed in life could continue to shape and influence the world even after death. Some bonds, as Nathaniel had written in his journal, never truly break. They change, they evolve, they transform, but they endure, connecting hearts across time, across distance, even across the ultimate boundary between life and death. In Orion's steadfast loyalty, in Clara's and Eliza's unexpected love, in the program that would help countless veterans and dogs find new purpose together, Nathaniel's love lived on, a testament to the power of connection, to the enduring nature of true devotion, to the remarkable capacity of the human heart to find light even in the darkest of times. And as they reached their car, Orion jumping eagerly into the back seat, ready for whatever came next, Clara and Eliza exchanged a smile that held within it all the complexity of their journey, the grief and the joy, the loss and the finding, the ending and the beginning. It was a smile that acknowledged the pain of the past while embracing the promise of the future. A smile that said, "We are here, we are together, and in this moment, that is enough." It was enough, more than enough. It was everything.